Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. So today we are back to talk about the books that I read in the second half of November. But first off, more importantly, it's the first day of Vlogmas. Yay! This is the very first video in my little Vlogmas series where I'll be uploading at least one video every other day of December. And yes, that includes the week following Christmas, so not like your typical Vlogmas videos where you don't get anything between Christmas and the New Year. No, no, no. And to start off these Vlogmas videos right, every single time I'm going to be showing you the little Christmassy outfit, usually a Christmas jumper, that I am wearing. So let's have a quick look at this little number, like, isn't it cute? So it just starts off with like a typical feral print and then goes off into little robins with love hearts, and then we go back and there's more love hearts and there's candy canes and more robins, and it's just so cute. Throughout the month I'm going to have different Christmas jumpers making appearances, both things that I personally own and things that have come from my sister and my mother's wardrobes. There might also be some slightly more fancy things, so like some proper sequiny glammy tops, so who knows, it could be anything. But back to books. I think, as you'll probably have seen if you have watched either of my previous month's wrap-ups, I hadn't been reading all that much. And coming into this final half of November, I felt like the same thing was going to happen. I just didn't feel like I had much motivation to read. I wasn't listening to any audiobooks, so I just felt a little bit about my reading, and that I was going to be coming back to BookTube once again being like, oh yeah, not really read much this month either. But actually I'm not going to be too down on myself because I've actually managed to read 4 books in this time, and I've also made some headway in a couple of other books, so I think we're making progress, we're getting back on track. Firstly, a book that I finished at the end of November but was the cumulative reading for about 3 months now. I finished A Poem for Every Autumn Day, edited by Ali Asiri. This is a poetry collection which is published by Pam Macmillan. It is based around their annual poetry collection, so I think it is a poem for every day and a poem for every night of the year. This takes 2 poems for every day from the 1st of September to the 30th of November. And yeah, it was really good fun to go through this every day. There were definitely some weeks there where I skipped things and then had to do like a big binge of all of the poems that I'd missed. But I think if you are somebody who is not typically into poetry, this might be a nice way of getting you into it. Of course, if you are a very seasonally minded reader, you'll really enjoy this. There's a nice mix of poems in here, classic and contemporary. Though I will say there is particularly quite a large focus in here on war poetry, and that is purely because there are a lot of anniversaries in autumn that are based around the world wars. But maybe for some people they might find that a bit repetitive. As somebody who is a big fan of history, I did like that there were little introductions at the beginning of each poem which basically laid out why it was that Ali Asiri chose the poem for that day, particularly paying in mind the historical context. So for example, on the 9th of October there is a poem by Michaela Morgan called Malala, and that is chosen for that particular day because the 9th of October 2012 is when Malala Yousafzai was shot by the Taliban. On the 25th of October we have the St. Crispin Day speech from Henry V to coincide with the anniversary of the Battle of Agincourt. It was little details like that that I really appreciated. There were some anniversaries and poem choices here that you would expect, and then others where it's just like, oh, that's really nice that they included that. I would never have thought of that. Definitely recommend that you pick this up maybe next year, and I am going to be working on the sequel, which is A Poem for Every Winter Day. And I feel like I'm even more excited for this because this is going to have so many Christmas poems. Next up in the second half of November, I picked up Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This was actually my very first time reading this book. I know that this book is such an institution for so many people, it is so beloved on BookTube, so I was really excited to give this a go and see what I thought. And this one is a very interesting one for me because I would highly recommend that you read this. I think it is a fantastic novel. I think Daphne du Maurier is such a skilled writer and her skill is all on show here. However, at the same time as saying that, I would highly recommend this to people. I don't necessarily think that this is a book that is for me. Whilst I was reading this, I was thinking, oh gosh, she's so talented, I can see why so many people love this. But then when I actually kind of stepped back and thought, am I enjoying this? The answer, to be honest, was no. I think the truth of the matter is just simply that this kind of mystery, suspense, very evocative, atmospheric, unreliable narrators, that kind of thing, it's just not my thing, but that does not mean that I wouldn't recommend it. So of course this is the famous story of an unnamed narrator who marries a man who is a little bit older than her and who is a widow. And very quickly our unnamed narrator becomes kind of obsessed with his previous wife Rebecca, which is not helped by the fact that when she and her new husband arrive at his estate Mandalay, it seems especially as if the housekeeper does not approve of this new wife, and she's constantly comparing her to her previous mistress and seems to be constantly trying to trip up the new wife and make her look bad. It's a book that is incredibly atmospheric and there were so many plot twists in here, and I was really glad that I came to this not actually knowing any of those twists. Something that I found really funny whilst reading it, and it's entirely intentional on the part of Daphne du Maurier, is the way that the imagination of this unreliable, unnamed narrator works. But I don't think I was quite expecting just how much her imagination would take up space on the page. I feel like if you've ever looked at Rebecca and been even slightly intimidated by it, maybe you look at like this 400-500 page book and think, oh gosh, that's a lot. I'd want you to know and to bear in mind that basically half of the actual content of this book is the main character basically imagining false scenarios that are not happening. And I don't think I'm exaggerating to say that this happens on pretty much every page. Pretty much every interaction she has with somebody, she will have the actual in real life conversation with somebody, and then she'll be like, I bet this person is saying mean things about me behind my back. I can just imagine this person going off to everybody and they're all laughing at me, and she will make up entire fake conversations in her head about what this person is saying about her to other people. And it was one of those things that I found really amusing at first. I found absolutely hilarious, and then it did start to grate on me a little bit. And then I realised maybe the reason that this is grating on me so much is because I totally do this too. I'm definitely somebody who is prone to overthinking. I will totally overanalyze like little context clues in an argument. If somebody's facial expression changes, I might be like, oh my god, they think I'm a moron, no! And if my brain allows me to, I will completely like retreat into myself and I'll be like, oh my god, this person thinks I'm an idiot. They're gonna go around telling everybody that I'm stupid. No, 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 no. I was saying on Twitter that maybe the reason that I'm finding this hard is that I'm seeing a lot of myself in this main character and I don't like it. That being said, I think I'm much more of a moral person than she is, so I'm not too concerned. I don't think I would excuse some of the bad things that other people do that she seems to excuse in this book, so whew. But yes, fantastic book. Definitely think that you should read it, especially if you think that this kind of book, this kind of genre appeals to you. But ultimately it is not going to go up as one of my favourite books of all time. Taking a nice little restorative break to talk about a lovely book that I received this month. So about a week or two ago, I got a bit of bad news and I was a bit down about it. I posted on Twitter asking people like what do they tend to do when they need cheering up, and then I got a lovely little DM from Leanne Rose, and she cheered me up very, very well, and then she also kind of snuck in very sneakily, what's your Amazon wish list? Drop me the link. And I was just like, that's not suspicious at all. And then the very next day, what should arrive at my house but this. And I just thought this was so lovely. So Leanne got me this little book called Book Love by Debbie Tung. This is a little graphic novel basically about what it is like being a book lover and just illustrating lots of different scenarios that we as book lovers get into. So for example, sniffing books indiscriminately. I quite like this one. Why are you glowing? Your recent order of books just arrived, didn't it? Everything feels so magical. This illustrator also has a book called Quiet Girl in a Noisy World, which is all about introversion, which is definitely one that I think I'm gonna have to pick up because I am an introvert myself. And I cannot thank Leanne enough for this. This was just such a delight to read. And because I was feeling in a little bit of a slumpy mood, I feel like this was the perfect thing just to re-energize me and just uplift me. And sometimes when you are in a bit of a bookish slump, it is nice to have something that reminds you why it is that you love books so very much. So highly recommend this. Definitely think that this would be a very nice bookish Christmas gift to give to somebody. And then finally we have Take Courage, Anne Bronte and the Art of Life by Samantha Ellis. This is a book that I just finished and I picked up particularly after hearing Melina and Melina Reed's absolutely raving about this. And this was an interesting one for me because I love the premise of this. This is basically all about Samantha Ellis's journey into discovering more about Anne Bronte. Basically trying to reclaim Anne Bronte, who is often kind of relegated as like the lesser Bronte of her sisters, which is something that I'm very passionate about because I think that Anne is just as good as Charlotte and Emily, and in fact for me, from the Bronte novels that I have read, Tenant of Wildfell Hall only ranks second to Jane Eyre. I think her writing is so fantastic and I hate the fact that often people ignore her. So I feel like I was really poised to love this. However, I had a few issues with the execution of this, and particularly the ways in which Samantha Ellis would kind of make her points. I think what is really important to establish about this book from the get-go is that this is not a traditional biography. Whilst we are talking a lot about Anne Bronte through this book, it is definitely about the author Samantha Ellis's journey into learning more about her, and her journey from going from somebody who never really considered Anne and thought she was the lesser sister into basically Samantha Ellis becoming like a champion of Anne. There is a lot of the author in this book. It is told in a very chatty, informal style. There are a lot of anecdotes from her own life. The way she approaches this book is for each chapter to take a particular figure from Anne's life and kind of view Anne through that person's lens. Though I wouldn't necessarily say that she is always successful in doing that. I feel like sometimes she drifts away from that main brief. Something that she makes very clear at the beginning is that there are very few sources for Anne's life aside from a few letters and her books themselves. And I completely understand that that is a difficulty. However, there were a lot of instances whilst reading this where I felt like Samantha Ellis relied way too heavily on the books for confirmation about Anne's own life, where Samantha Ellis will just assume that because something happened in Tenant of Wildfell Hall that it must be true for Anne's life as well. There are many instances where she seems to take the novels as being completely autobiographical, which is not the case. The Brontes are well known for using like a lot of their own life in their books, but that does not mean that every character correlates to somebody in their own life. For example, early on she starts talking about the Brontes' aunt Elizabeth and trying to piece together whether or not Charlotte and Anne liked her. And she basically boils it down to, well, the aunt figure in Jane Eyre is horrible and therefore Charlotte must have hated Aunt Elizabeth, but the aunt in Tenant of Wildfell Hall is lovely, so I guess Anne loved her Aunt Elizabeth. And it's like, it's not as simple as that. You can't just say that because something was in this novel that it must be true to life. There were so many instances where I just wanted to shout, source. And I feel like part of this might be due to the fact that there is a big tendency, particularly like on Goodreads, when it comes to non-fiction history, that when a historian says things like, this may have happened, this might be the case, they often get criticised for that. I feel like historians often get criticised for acknowledging that there is an ambiguity rather than taking a firm stance. This has been a major criticism that I've seen whenever I've looked at Goodreads reviews, for example, for Alison Weir, because where there isn't enough evidence to say something, she will often say, she may have done this, she may have been here, but we don't know. And I don't understand why people take such an issue with this. One of the things about the past that is really hard but true is that we will never know 100% what happened, and that we often do not have the evidence. Where evidence is thin, a historian will often try and ponder what might have happened to try and fill in the gap, but they have to back themselves up. They cannot just be going around saying this definitely happened if they do not have the evidence for it. They can't go around presenting things that may not be true without also refuting some of the counterclaims that other people might have against them. This book tends to go the other way, where Samantha Ellis will be constantly asserting things that she cannot possibly say are true because there just is not enough evidence to back them up. In some sections as well, there is a lot of repetitive language that kind of grated on me a little bit, where she'll be like, I wish this was so, I wish this was so, I wish this person knew this thing, or I hope this person knew this, I hope, no wonder this person did this thing, no wonder they also thought this. And it's like, you need to find another way of doing this. There were so many times where I thought this author is just putting way too much of herself into the book. There's a section where the Bronte parsonage are basically going through like different locks of hair that they have from the Brontes and talking about how they cannot definitively pin down which hair is Anne's, and she's talking about how she desperately wants Anne to have dark hair like she does, and I'm just like, what? That she feels depressed when she considers that Anne might not have this brown hair that she's found. And I'm just like, I think you've taken this a little too far. There's a section where she's going through a poem that Anne wrote when she was 23 at the seaside, and Anne is basically reveling in this new landscape of the sea that she has never seen before. And Samantha Ellis writes, at first this makes my inner Wuthering Heights addict revolt. I don't want Anne to fall for new landscapes. I want her to be a native and nursling of the moors, as Charlotte called Emily, and Anne actually was nursed at Haworth, so she has more claim to the title. I want Anne to be obsessive about the moors, like Emily, who pined when she was away from them, and like Cathy and Heathcliff, who roamed the moors as children and haunted them as ghosts. It seems fickle of Anne to suddenly decide she likes the sea too. And once again, I'm just like, what? I'm sorry, you don't like the fact that Anne likes both the moors and the seaside? You think it's fickle of her to like the seaside? What are we talking about here? It was just a kind of criticism that I found really off. Samantha Ellis will paint a picture of Anne Bronte as she wants her to be, and then she'll get immediately disappointed when the evidence shows that that is not the case. And I get it, I'm sure we've all been there with a figure that we really relate to and feeling disappointed that they are not 100% matching up to our expectations, but I'm like, why is this in the book? I also felt in so many ways that Samantha Ellis's way of building Anne up was basically to tear down Charlotte and Emily. And I feel like this is a trap that a lot of Bronte fans get into, whether it is writers or readers, that the Bronte sisters are often pitted against each other, and I've never understood it. And it seems in many ways like in order for Samantha Ellis to build up Anne and talk about how brilliant Anne was and how much of a feminist icon she was, that suddenly her sisters become lesser beings, that they are not as talented as writers as she is, that they are not as extraordinary. And I feel like Charlotte especially gets hard done by this. Charlotte Bronte gets stripped down into being just this bitchy sister who mutilated her sister's work, who didn't understand her. And I don't like that. I don't think there is any nuance with that interpretation. I don't think Charlotte was a saint at all, but I think that sisterly dynamics and relationships are really complicated. I think Charlotte was a very complicated character. I don't think she was a saint by any means, but I also don't think that Charlotte is the devil because she did try and control the public image of herself and her sisters. I don't know, I feel like I definitely want to read more Anne Bronte biographies, but I think I would want to go for something that is a little bit more grounded and has a little less of the author in them. I know there's a biography called In Search of Anne Bronte, so let me know if you've read that before, what you think of that. I think there is definitely a case to be made for Anne Bronte and trying to raise her up in public consciousness, but I don't think that that means that you need to tear down her other two sisters. You can like all three of the Bronte sisters at the same time, you don't have to pick your favourite and defend them to the grave. I don't want this to come across like I'm panning this book. I feel like there's some passages in here that are really emotional, really affecting, but I did have issues with the way that Samantha Ellis presented her information. Basically, I wanted the footnotes. But yes, anyway, those are all of the books that I read in the second half of November. Do let me know if you've picked up any of these, what you thought, any that you're interested in reading yourself, and let me know about any books that you read in the month of November. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic, fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.